What's up everyone, John from ARTV. It's time for another Patreon pileup, which is where I go through the $20 per month patrons and take their requests for albums or else videos that they want covered. And here, I'm covering albums because a lot of you guys who are supporting on Patreon had specific requests for either throwback albums or else new albums that I might have missed in 2017. So what do we have on the chopping block today? Well, you obviously saw the title and the thumbnail. We're gonna get into it, but everything from the 80s and They Might Be Giants to some of the new stuff like Sworn In. You will see up on the docket what we have today. But I did want to let you know if you want to get in on it and if you want to see something either reviewed or maybe a top 10 countdown, a specific video request that you might have, you can check the top link in the description. It's my Patreon page. It really does help support me on a monthly basis, and in return you might get a cool video that maybe never would have been made otherwise. So don't forget to drop a like on the video. Hopefully you enjoy this, and let's get on with the first request. The first album that I'm going to take a look at today is by Woodkid. I'm not going to try and pronounce his actual name. It's a French name, but he's like a director, composer, and this album is called The Golden Age, kind of like orchestral-leaning pop. And I'm kind of surprised that I didn't know about it, but at the same time I'm not surprised, and I'll get into why in just a second. But this one is for my Patreon supporter, Braden. Now, with this record by Woodkid, it's kind of a swirl of emotions. Some of the tracks are much more bombastic than others, and some of them, as the titles would imply, like I Love You, are more down to earth, a little bit more dreamy, but he also manages to float in a lot of outside and, like I said, cinematic influences as well. And overall, I would say that this is an enjoyable piece, but I said that I was surprised that I didn't know about it because I used to work at a movie theater, and this album came out in 2013, which is right after. That's probably why I didn't hear it. I kind of got out of the mood for that music, and I was just surrounded by movie nerds with the people that I worked for the longest time. It was a small independent theater, and they all talked about like movies and that sort of thing, and like cinematic music and that sort of thing. And I was into some of it, but at the same time, you clean a theater over and over and over again. Every night that music is playing, like while you clean the theaters. So I was familiar with this dude's name. I had heard it floating around before, but I had never actually like listened to a song like outside of the theater, I don't think. And I had never heard anything from this record. So I was interested whenever Braden described the sound of this to me. I think he said he was involved with the work of some like video game soundtracks and that sort of thing. And I would say that some of the standout cuts here are the ones that definitely mix in some of those like elements like the string sections and the urgency of a film, like Run Boy Run, which was one of the singles from this thing, or even The Great Escape. Those are moments that can kind of build up tension, but also have a big payoff to them. And it's like you're watching a movie except you're listening to a song. So in that aspect, it's very cool. But at the same time, this album runs about 50 minutes long, and it can get a bit tedious, honestly. Some of these moments really don't jump out, and Woodkid himself as a vocalist, while solid enough, he doesn't seem like he is beyond average in that regard. I think more of his talent lies in the production work and then mixing elements, whether it be the orchestration or just overseeing anything from like a little bit of a sweeping guitar melody to the bombastic drumming that definitely does add that cinematic and dark tone to it on some of the moments, like even the opening track, The Golden Age. This album has its catchiness, but it also has its darkness, and somewhere in between I think it wanders off the path a bit, but overall, it's a pretty enjoyable listen. I can't say that it's something and a type of music that I would necessarily gravitate towards on my own, but that's the point of these Patreon reviews, right? You guys get me to check out more stuff, see what I enjoy, and I actually saved a couple of these tracks to my Spotify. I'm gonna try and maybe listen to maybe a few other albums up this alley in the coming future. We'll see. I'm gonna give this one a light 3.5 out of 5. Somewhere in between Weird Al Yankovic and the Aquabats lie They Might Be Giants, one of the most underlyingly consistent bands of the past 30 years. Now, I myself am not super familiar with them, but this is for my patron Andrew. He suggested that I check this album out. He wanted me to know a little bit more about the band, and it was cool as I looked into what he said, and obviously more details about their second record, Lincoln. Now, with this album, I'm just going to be kind of talking about the standard edition. duration. There's 18 songs, about 40 minutes. They're short, sweet, punchy, kind of comedic, don't take themselves too seriously. There's also like 2013 Australian bonus tracks, but we're gonna not talk about those today because that's another 18 right there. So there's only so much we can crunch in. So with these 18 tracks, they do come across short and sweet, but they also leave kind of a fun taste in your mouth, if that makes sense. It's like, what did I just listen to? Like the first couple of times, it was a lot for me to take in because they were kind of ridiculous and they are cheesy. John and John are the two musicians behind They Might Be Giants. And in a way, they were very much ahead of their time. Yes, Weird Al existed at that time, but their music wasn't so comedic and so over the top that you couldn't take it seriously. And as I listened through records like this, you can see some like tongue-in-cheek references and the way that they kind of have a sense of sarcasm to them that maybe other artists like that in the comedic vein just were not aware of. Now, some of these moments definitely do get a bit grating to me. John Flansburgh, John Linnell, the masterminds behind this, they definitely have their ideas that I can see that they were cooking up, but some of them are just either so ridiculous or sung in such a different vein that I know that it's kind of meant to be nerdy and weird, but it's not for me. It's not my personal taste whatsoever. Like Santa's Beard is one that struck me as super out there on this record, even though it is one of the shorter songs. Not that any of these songs are all that long, but this is one of the ones that clocks in under 2 minutes. And then we also have Piece of Dirt, which I kind of read along the lyrics with it and I tried to really see where it was coming from, but it still doesn't strike me, even if I understand a little bit more of what they were going for. Just the song structure and the oddity with the vocals, it doesn't add up for me. Some of these songs actually really grew on me though. As I listened through this album a handful of times, I found one track, Cage and Aquarium, especially to be quite interesting and funny, and I was listening to this album and my hamster, who actually has an aquarium, was sitting right in front of me, and I don't know what struck me about that perspective, but something about that made the song click for me. And then some of the other moments like Purple Toupee, which is silly, kind of gimmicky in a way, but not really, because it's not doing and playing off of the same jokes that other people were. It's just like this stood out. I mean, I've listened to plenty of music from the late 80s, and this album Lincoln came out in 1988, and it's just not something that you would necessarily expect, and like I said, in a way they were kind of ahead of their time. And Purple Toupee is really catchy, even if it's not the lyrics, it's the melody that's stuck in my head. And I can say the same thing for other cuts like Mr. Me and They'll Need a Crane, which is really, really fast-paced, kind of quirky. They'll need a crane, they'll need a crane. The kind of sly undertones and commentary of the world's address is something that I found intriguing, and I also really like the almost jazzy affectation that Lie Still Little Bottle has. It feels like it's something that I've heard before. I don't know if this was maybe used in commercials or if it's kind of indirectly parodying some other things, but the way that the creeping bass line and the almost snappable feel comes up, it's palpable how you can feel like I've heard something like this before, or else maybe I've heard this exact song before and I just didn't know it. I know that I had heard of They Might Be Giants long, long ago, starting as soon as Clarissa Explains It All. I didn't know who they were, but not that long ago at all. I actually went back and had seen some of that show and saw that she referenced one of the Johns and talked of him as being dreamy and liking They Might Be Giants. And then obviously they did the Malcolm in the Middle theme song and you know, the whole You're Not the Boss of Me Now. That's where I think a lot of people knew them from. But over the years, I've looked into it. They're very innovative. They're constantly putting out music, whether it be children's albums or else their regular, more alternative and rock and quirky stuff. These guys are talented, they're in their 50s now. I definitely recommend going back, checking out records like this, and really whatever appeals to you. I mean, they've got a little something for everyone with as many studio albums as they put out. So with Lincoln, I'm gonna give this a 3.5 out of 5. Up next on the list, number 3, the third album I'm talking about today is by the metalcore and noisecore band Sworn In. It's called All Smiles, and this request is for my Patreon supporter Matthew. So I took a look at this album, and it is very noisy. It's definitely noisy. It lives up to the whole noisecore term. And it's not something that I've really been gravitating towards as of late. I mean, music with screaming definitely has its place, but there's so much of a generic quality to much of it. It's always like, we're angry, we're rising up against something, or we're bitter for this reason. and it's kind of hard for me to kind of sift through all of it, so as a result, I often just kind of push past it and focus on other things. But getting the chance to check out this record, I have to say that some of it, while not all of it for me whatsoever, is enjoyable. I mean, it definitely is something to kind of vent frustrations towards. It's something that if I am in an angry mood or I have that vibe or spirit about me, it's something where I could see this being an album to release something to. But I think it kind of loses me by like the 5th track. Once we get over to like Puppeteer and Crybaby, I start seeing some of the same tropes that I've heard from, if not them, in the past. I have listened to one of their albums in the past before, and then maybe another metalcore band. It just feels like I've heard these ideas. And Don't Look at Me, and even All Smiles, the particular track from this. Those are moments that have their punishing drums and their harsh vocals that do jump off to me. And I don't know if it's the fact that maybe those are the better songs, or if just those are the ones that are near the start of the album and it starts to lose me because they're not mixing things up. So I'm not gonna say that necessarily one thing stands out above another throughout the entire record, but overall, for me, it's just kind of like a flat line across. There's not really high peaks or else low valleys. It's just a ride that's going all the way across like this. So for me, sorry Matthew, I know hopefully you were probably expecting me to hopefully like this more, but I'm always honest with my Patreon reviews and any review in general. I can't give this more than a 2.5 out of 5, but I do recommend, obviously, with any of these, that you guys check them out for yourself, see what you think. Maybe you weren't even aware that Sworn In put out a record, or who this band are. Very excited to talk about this next one because I discovered Julien Baker after her record came out, and it was like too late for me to talk about it in an album review on the channel. It came out in like January of 2016. I don't think I found her until like mid to late 2016 or something like that, but I just really was captivated by her Tiny Desk concert at NPR, blown away, and the frailty of her voice. Julien Baker's album Sprained Ankle is what I am covering today for my Patreon supporter, Michael. He requested that, and I was just stoked because I love this album. It's something that is very moody. It's very sad white girl with guitar type music, but it's at the same time so unique. And it's just like, as she says on the particular track here, she says, "Wish I could write songs about anything other than death." I mean, so many of these songs are just depressing, but you just want to sit down and almost have a good cry to them. It can be a mood album, but at the same time, I can listen to an album like this whenever I'm in a good mood because the music is so striking and bold. It's mainly just her and that electric guitar and that voice, whether it be the layers that are going on or just the rawness and that aspect as well. Now, it wasn't until I saw Brand New in concert last fall. They actually covered her song, Sprained Ankle, the title track from this album, and I was like, is this a new Brand New song? And I was like, oh wait, I know, I've heard this, I think maybe. And then I checked out the full album, was just blown away by how emotive and explosive some of these moments are, because she really lets it go, whether it be just the sadness and the quality of the music or just the crooning and the guitar and the musicality and the tone overall. She just nails this vibe perfectly, and it's like putting nails in the coffin just to your emotions, because if you're just trying to hold on, sometimes she just hits that note or she says that one line, like on Everybody Does, where she addresses abandonment, or on Rejoice, where she just belts it out with that incredible voice that she has over these guitars that aren't necessarily roaring by any means. They're still kind of quiet, but her voice is what drowns you in the sound. Baker even seems to admit to herself that she cannot accept things as positive, and she's always finding the negative, or else everything is always happening to her. And I relate to that in a sense. Like Good News is a track that's right up that alley, or even Vessels is one that I found to be one of the most creative on this entire LP. And I can see where she's coming from, what she's channeling, and she seems like such a nice person. I mean, she just opened for Paramore. She's getting a lot of big breaks, I would say. She has a new track that's out in the world, and that one's pretty good as well. It's just something where I feel like she's got a big career ahead of her. If she keeps pushing like this, if she keeps maybe even adding a little bit more flair to the music, I could see this growing into an exponential career. I love this Sprained Ankle LP. I'm glad that I finally got to talk about it, and for me, I'm gonna give it a light 4.5 out of 5. We finally made it to the final album on the Patreon pile-up today, and it is from my Patreon supporter Ian, and he requested that I talk about the Gaslight Anthem's debut album, Sink or Swim. Now, if you guys are wanting to check this out, I'll let you know, it is not available on streaming services, unfortunately. It's not on Spotify, it's not on Apple Music. I found it myself on YouTube. I had to go through it in a playlist form there. I don't know how many of my viewers are familiar with the Gaslight Anthem. I have reviewed 2 of their records, but those are also the only 2 that I have heard from them. So I had never heard this project, and I found it to be very interesting whenever I went in. I had the expectations of it kind of sounding maybe a little bit more open and Americana leaning, but this is definitely, I would say, more on the kind of punky, bluesy, folksy type side, and it's very, very interesting. Probably the best thing that I have heard from them to date. This is something that I felt much more engaged with than some of their other albums that didn't have much of a replay factor to them, for me at least personally, but this is something where I can just listen through and I really admire everything from kind of the rough and tough vocals on it to the much more gritty production and just the rawness and approach of the musicality. There's definitely a big feeling of connectivity all throughout this album, and that's something that not necessarily was missing from their others. It's just something that I find even more striking on an album like Sink or Swim. And even though this came out 10 years ago in 2007, I still find a lot of these songs to be very relatable and with a very strong message. Like 1930, for example. That's a very touching tribute to his grandmother that had Alzheimer's. That's something that I know my girlfriend just dealt with the loss of her grandmother there, and it's something that honestly kind of made me tear up once I looked into the meaning of the song and just listened to it more closely. It's something that I've dealt with in my family as well, losing lots of people to Alzheimer's disease. Just an awful, awful thing. You never want to see somebody go like that. And then you've got like Red in the Morning, which mixes things up. Not that 1930 didn't have an upbeat flair to it necessarily with more downtrodden lyrics, but Red in the Morning definitely has this kind of great punk energy to it that splices things up, adds in a lot of pep and energy and a real kick to those guitars there. And then the single that actually has a music video, this was really cool to see just looking back on Brian Fallon and the band as a much younger group, obviously them being in their late 30s now, seeing them in their late 20s. I had to call you Joe Woody. That's a really hard name for me to say for some reason. I had to call you Joe. I had to call you Woody Joe. Damn, that took me like 3 times. I had to call you Woody Joe was something that was written for a friend. It was in memoriam of them. And obviously, I think I saw a lot of people in the comments saying, Skate 2, Skate 2. This was in the soundtrack. I played that game as well, and I totally forgot about this song. But it's another great one, and overall, I have to say that I was pretty surprised with myself with enjoying this album as much as I did. I liked some of the Gaslight Anthem stuff, but I hadn't been super into it, and like I said, I wasn't coming back for repeated listens, but you never know. I kind of wish this was on Spotify so I could come back to it more frequently and more easily, but still a really, really solid album overall. I'm gonna give it a 4. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing the Patreon pile-up reviews today. Maybe you saw an album covered that you maybe thought would never get covered on this channel, but here you go. If you want to get in on it and you're able to support ARTV, the $20 per month level actually unlocks the pledge where you get to request a video. So thank you very much to everybody who's supporting there and on TAD as well. It's the top 2 links in the description down below. Other than that, let's cut to the outro card. Did you notice this on my face the entire video? Maybe you thought it was a piece of dirt. No, my girlfriend said that I wouldn't do it, but I totally did. I shaved off everything but that. No worries, it'll be gone soon. Anyways, a couple of recent videos right here, including the last Patreon video, links in the description for all socials, and I'll see you very soon right here on ARTV.